Welcome to the Workflow Podcast. If you enjoy this show, please like, share, and or subscribe. And now, on with the show. Hello, and welcome back to the Workflow Podcast. I've lost count of how many episodes we're up to. What are we? Episode number 7 of season 3, all about optimizing your personal productivity. So in the first few episodes of this season, we looked at all of the ways we go about sabotaging our time. We looked at task switching, saying yes, working past the point of diminishing returns, taking the path of least effort, as well as shallow activities, be it Slack, be it email, be it meetings, and how all of these things combined can essentially leave us busy all day, all week, all month long, but with absolutely very little to show for it come the end of the day. So now we're going to start to get into the good stuff, which is how we go about circumventing all of this to get more out of our days, to leave our days, our weeks feeling more fulfilled and a lot closer to our goals. And also getting more done in less time so we can free up time to reinvest it into other pursuits, be it our personal relationships, be it our mental health, be it our physical health, be it connecting with our long forgotten interests, or be it connecting with ourselves. Because so many of us can get so immersed in work to the point where we just lose that connection with ourselves, who we really are outside of just someone punching away at a keyboard all day long. So let's get right into it. So where I wanted to kick things off was really on this topic of prioritization, because it is such a powerful topic that not enough people really give enough time. Like, they might have some kind of ad hoc process to prioritize things, which is really just based on subjective judgment in the moment. They'll take whatever is in front of them and just say, oh yeah, I might work on this. But we really need to have a better approach when it comes to prioritization. And the reason why this is so important is because we can otherwise get lulled into just doing the urgent. As Dwight Eisenhower once said, I've got 2 problems. Most urgent things aren't important, and most important things aren't urgent. And if we don't take the time to prioritize, we will find ourselves constantly fighting fires, constantly tackling the next email that falls into our inbox, the next tap on our shoulder, at the expense of those higher value activities which are really going to move the needle. So the high value important activities that we don't spend enough time on because we're always just prioritizing the next thing that lands on our desk, which is urgent, but typically not that important. So when it comes to prioritization, it's worth noting that, as Wilfredo Pareto noted centuries ago, the famous Italian mathematician, that 20% of causes are responsible for 80% of effects. So this is true of, say, customers. Typically, if you're a large organization with hundreds of clients, typically your top 20% of clients or of customers will generate about 80% of your income. Now, that's not a perfect rule. It could be the top 30% generate the top 70%, but typically a small number of clients will generate most of the revenue. The same holds true universally. If you think about traffic on our roads, 80% of the cars typically are on 20% of the roads. So if you think about, say, where I live, the state of Victoria, which has about 6 million people, but 5 million of those people are in Melbourne, which is a much smaller percentage of the geographical spread of the state of Victoria. And then within Melbourne, the majority of traffic would be closer to the CBD, on freeways, as opposed to the residential back streets. So this shows up there. It shows up in ownership of land and possession of capital, with, say, the top 1% of people in the world accumulating most of the wealth. If you look at land ownership, the top 20% or 20% of people typically own about 80% of the land. If you look at words of English words in our books, 20% of the words in the English language take up about 80% of the real estate in our books. So this shows up absolutely everywhere. And the reason why this is important should be obvious. The chances are you've got, say, 10 things on your to-do list right now, for example. But of those 10, perhaps 2, maybe 3 will be way more valuable than the other 7 or 8 tasks on your to-do list. But as I've indicated in a previous episode on taking the path of least effort, if you don't prioritize and put those higher value, perhaps more difficult to do tasks at the top of the list, you'll take the path of least effort and perhaps do the easiest task instead, even though it's not really going to move the needle. Oftentimes if you just do that one big thing a day, every day, that's arguably a lot more advisable than simply doing many simple, easy things every single day that aren't really going to move the needle, so to speak. So, I talked about different examples where this 80-20 phenomenon shows up, but the thing to remember about 80-20 is if you take 80-20 and apply it to 80-20, so 80% times 80, 20% times 20, it suggests that 64% of the effects come from just 4% of the causes, and 50% of the effects come from just 1% of the causes. So you can, by getting better at identifying that signal in the noise of all the stuff you could possibly do, what's that 1% that can generate 50% of the value? So this is something that's known as an 80-20 power law, and for those of you on the YouTube, the image I have on the screen comes out of Perry Marshall's book, 80-20 Sales and Marketing, which I highly recommend. And it provides an example for, say, a Taylor Swift concert, where there will be perhaps 5% of customers who would be willing to spend, say, $600 for not just a ticket, but a ticket at the very front, in the very front row, a ticket to, say, a meet and greet with Taylor, perhaps before the concert, and perhaps that ticket would also include exclusive merchandise, a tour book, and things of that persuasion. Now, by identifying those customers and giving them access to this superior service, those customers alone can make just as much money as perhaps the next 30, 40, 50% of customers who are perhaps only paying $200 for a ticket to the concert. And I know Taylor's also been quite proactive when it comes to doing things differently when it comes to the release of music. So her music, I believe, is now available on Spotify. But for hardcore fans who are willing to pay, say, I'm not sure, but it could be about $50 or $100, they get access to her albums several weeks before everyone else. So there are different ways to identify and then serve those 20% customers, or those 5% customers, the power customers, let's call them, who are willing to spend a lot more money for your product than everybody else. Now, this is something that I've had to think about with my consultancy. There are some clients that are willing to spend several $100,000 a year on a large suite of services, whereas there are others who might only spend $10,000, say, on a workshop. Now, I could spend my time and my team's time trying to find many customers who are going to spend $10,000 on one workshop, or we can spend our time finding and cultivating maybe 2 or 3 good relationships with clients who are willing to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, that's going to be a much better return on investment on our time. It's going to take us less time to serve those 3 customers than 50 customers, but the value of those 3 perhaps will be just as great as the value of the other 50 combined. And another way this phenomenon shows up, which I thought was quite interesting, was based on an experiment I ran. So I actually ran an experiment where I looked at the top 20 Nintendo Entertainment System games of all time in terms of sales. So I grew up in the early 90s, so I had a Nintendo Entertainment System at home. I was an absolute superstar at Super Mario Bros. And I could get to level 8-4 literally within, 5 or 10 minutes of starting the game. It was fantastic. I don't know if I'm that good these days, but that's the way it was back then. Now, when you look at the top 20 selling video games or Nintendo Entertainment System games of all time, the top 3, which are Super Mario Bros. 1, Duck Hunt, and Super Mario Bros. 3, they together sold about 85 million units, which is more than the next 17 games combined. So this shows up absolutely everywhere. So when it comes to prioritizing your tasks, you want to delineate between high effort, low value, high effort, high value, low effort, low value, and low effort, high value. Now, of course, you want to prioritize for low effort, high value, and then second, high effort, high value. Whereas high effort, low value, why are we even wasting our time there? We want to be, the 80-20 principle, it's a universal law of nature, and nature has many teachers for us. In fact, if we look at, say, lions in the wild, they're not going out hunting tigers because the return on investment is going to be low. I mean, there is a risk that they will get hurt, that they might not survive that altercation. The energy expenditure to take down a tiger is going to be quite high. And then also a tiger, while it's a large animal, it may not feed our pride as well as, say, a buffalo. Now, a buffalo is a much larger animal, but it's also one that a lion is going to be more prepared to take down. The energy expenditure is lower, but the return on investment is higher. So we want to think like lions when it comes to our work. How do we go about identifying and hunting buffalo when it comes to our work? Now, one simple way you might go about doing this is simply value over effort. So if I have a number of tasks on my to-do list, I'll first want to allocate a value out of 10 for those tasks. So for example, if the task is admin, it might be 4 out of 10. If the task is preparing a talk, it might be 8 out of 10. If the task is doing some web development, the value could be 10 out of 10. Now, of course, that's subjective and it depends upon the nature of those tasks, the timelines that I need to deliver, and so on. Now, once I determine the value out of 10, I'll then want to determine the cost. So what's the cost in terms of effort, time, to deliver that value? So the coding could be a 10 out of 10 for value, and the cost might be a 5. So what I simply want to do then is to take the value and divide it by the cost, a simple return on investment calculation, which will give me a score. So if the coding value was 10, the cost was 5, 10 divided by 5 equals 2. And then what you're simply going to do is prioritize by the highest score. In this case, if you're on the YouTube, you can see the priority for these scores is the highest priority activity on my table is coding, which was 10 divided by 5 equals 2. So you want to prioritize that. Whereas the admin, which was a value of 4 and a cost of 4, gets a score of 1, and it is the second lowest on our priorities list. So by doing this, you're going to avoid taking the path of least effort, and you're going to sit down and work on the highest value activity in terms of the return on investment on that activity. Now, of course, you could do this on a daily basis based on a simple to-do list. But the thing about to-do lists is they typically keep us locked in a reactive short-term cycle where we will still, while we're prioritizing our tasks, we're still perhaps only doing that on a day-to-day basis and neglecting the longer-term goals and not really tying that into, say, our quarterly, our 6-monthly, our annual objectives. So even though we might prioritize, if we're just doing this on a day-to-day basis with a simple to-do list, it is still fraught with folly. So in the next episode of the Workflow podcast, I'm going to introduce time blocking, which feeds into our quarterly goals, our longer-term goals, and helps us make the most of prioritization. So I'm looking forward to bringing you that episode in the next few days. But until then, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Workflow is out.